Good morning and welcome to Blixx All About Horses and Their Care, where our motto is companionship, care, and commitment. I'm your host, Gabriela Rodriguez, and today we're going to talk about a subject that's very serious, very important, but it's also a little bit difficult to talk about. It's part of the series that I'm doing called Your Horse's Future. This is part 3, and it's called Your Choices When Your Horse Dies. So today we're going to be talking about a lot of topics and a lot of things that make people uncomfortable, perhaps, or difficult to talk about, and that includes myself, especially in the last few weeks where I've been doing some research to put this show together. A lot of it is science, and I'm all for science, and I'm very interested in science, but like I was talking to my guest, I think sometimes things are a little too close for comfort, and you have to get beyond that in order to make good decisions for yourself and for your animal. So today we're going to be covering that, and in order to help us get through all of that, we have a very special guest that came all the way from China, Maine, to be on our show today, and his name is Bill Seekins. And Bill, I'm going to read all your credits, is a retired compost researcher for the Maine Department of Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry. He's also the founder and director of the Maine Compost School, and he's a member of the Maine Compost Team, and I believe there are 4 members of the Maine Compost Team. And in addition to that, he's done an incredible amount of research on composting, something that a lot of people are interested in doing these days. And he's the author of a manual for the Department of Agriculture titled Best Management Practices for Animal Carcass Composting. And I'd like to introduce my guest to you now, and this is Bill Seekins.
Good afternoon.
Thank you for coming down. We were actually talking about the weather and the winter and the snow and all the things that we have to do now in order to try to get rid of all that snow. We've had a really difficult winter. Right?
We certainly have.
Yeah.
It's been a challenge, to say the least.
It has been a challenge. And one of the reasons that I wanted to do the show in the middle of winter, it's March, but the ground is still frozen, when we had a chance to talk about how difficult some of these options could be, or how we could be limited in how we dispose of the bodies of our horses when they die. And so that's why I wanted to do it at this time of year. Can you give us a little bit about your background? Tell us why you became or how you became interested in the things that you're doing in regards to composting?
Well, it goes back a long ways. I was a researcher at the Department of Agriculture from 1981 until 2012. And
Well, that's a long time.
that's a long time, 31 years. And one of the earliest projects that I was involved in was looking at how materials could be recycled in agriculture, primarily looking at soil nutrients, and looking at how different industrial, commercial, municipal waste could be used in agriculture. And one of the things I discovered early in the process was that most of these materials, even though they had value, couldn't be used as they arrive from the processor or the municipality very well. They would have significant problems with them. And in my research, I found that there were always processes that you could use to improve these materials. For instance, with fish waste, you could use acid hydrolysis, or you could use dehydration, or you could compost it. And I discovered for almost every material that I investigated, there would be 2 or 3 or 4 options for processing to make it more useful in agriculture. And composting was always one of those. And so the light bulb went on and said, I need to know more about this composting thing. What is this?
Yeah. Were people already doing that on their own then? I
No,
don't think so, right?
No, very
That's
few
become
people.
A trend.
Very few people even knew what the word was
Okay.
in the early 80s. There were maybe 1 or 2 composters in the state that you could identify as doing it on a kind of a commercial basis.
Yep.
So I got some training from a composter named Bruce Fulford. This is way back in the early 80s. And set out to do some projects using materials that I'd identified.
Yep.
My first project was composting various fish byproducts, and learned a lot from that. And that led me to, one more thing and one more thing. We did composting blueberry waste from a blueberry processing plant, cull potatoes and potato processing waste in Aroostook County. And, and so the list, a lot of these were still agricultural, but some were not.
Right, right.
So over time, I got a chance to play with a lot of these different materials and find out how they worked in the composting process. Inevitably, you always ended up with a nice, rich soil product that people were dying to get into their gardens.
Right, because it's full of nutrients.
It's full of nutrients, and it's full of organic matter, which has a lot of benefits to the soil. And people are just in the last few years are beginning to recognize how valuable the organic matter from compost is in their gardens. And so I've seen the whole issue of compost go from very little knowledge to one where most people, if you ask them about compost, say, "Oh, that's great for the soil. I use it in my garden."
Yeah.
So now it's become widely used, and it's a process that's used to manage a lot of different kind of byproducts. In Maine, we have many composters handling everything from wood waste to seafood byproducts and so on. And so that work led me to looking at some other issues. One of them was, what do you do with slaughterhouse byproducts and animal carcasses? And both of those happened in the same year, it was 2001.
Right.
As a result of the mad cow outbreak in Great Britain, where people were looking at how can you dispose of these animals, or if you had a foot and mouth disease outbreak and so on. And so we began doing research in 2001 in the process of managing those kinds of problematic materials that a lot of people considered couldn't be composted.
Right.
And so we developed processes over time, experimented with different materials that could be used as the medium in which the carcass or the slaughterhouse residuals could be composted.
And the carcass, when you say carcass, that's one word that I had to even look it up, because I had seen, or I'm familiar with the word, but when I see the word carcass, it doesn't give me a good picture in my mind. And actually it was very interesting when I looked it up. Carcass is, of course, the body of a dead animal, and they also use it to define the body of a dead person. So it crosses over from animals to people, but a carcass is also like a skeleton. It could be like the leftover remains of a car or of a structure, right? So that's a carcass. But when I think of carcass, I always think of, something really ugly or something scary, I guess. It's a lot of this is fear-based emotions. But it's actually could be the body of your horse that just died, and then we call it a carcass, right?
Right.
So I might call it the body, and you can call it a carcass, but we'll go back and forth that way.
Well, the term body can be used for a living or a non-living animal. So the term carcass is actually more specific to mean only the non-living.
The dead body.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So live body versus dead.
Right. Whereas people do say the dead body.
Yeah.
They have to kind of modify that to make sure that you understand what they're talking
Right.
about.
Well, it's a hard subject to talk about
Right.
anyway.
It's
Yeah.
it's an uncomfortable subject.
Yeah, but what we're trying to do today with the show is put everything out there so people aren't afraid, and they can see what their options might be, and they can understand the science behind all of this, particularly the composting, because we're going to do 2 parts to the show. This is part 1. We're going to introduce the different options, but the next show is going to be all about composting, and that's where you're going to give us all the information that you've gotten from your research all these years that you've spent since 1981, and going through different phases and learning through different phases with the mad cow disease that I totally had forgotten about. And then after that, you know, you're a scientist and a researcher
That's
within
right.
this.
Right.
So I have the best person on the show to tell us how to deal with all of this. You know, it's interesting too, and I didn't mean to interrupt you, but at the high school where I'm a substitute teacher, it's a very important subject there in the biology labs. They have a compost bin, and they work with all of those things, and they have the students learning about composting. So I don't know if that's part of the curriculum with a lot of the high schools, but it's certainly happening, and more people are becoming educated about the advantages of doing things in that manner. So after Mad Cow, then you continue to do your research.
Right. And we've done a number of series of trials over the years.
Scientific trials.
Scientific trials.
Yep.
Looking at kind of refining the process, identifying different media that you can compost with.
Yes.
And things that work well, things that don't work so well, what the problems are with the things that don't work well.
Yep. And you're doing that also so that you can have all this information and have the right or the correct, I don't know what word to use, the process and the materials that people can use so they don't have to do the research, so they can do it right the first time.
Right. And the result of much of that research was used in putting together that best management practices manual.
Yes.
So
that I actually have here.
So the materials are listed, processes are listed in there.
Yep.
That help guide someone through the process and how to evaluate what you have and whether it's something that's likely to work.
Yes.
And you know, it talks about volumes of material, and the photo on the cover, for example, was from a trial that we did on a dairy farm where we were simulating what would happen if there was a foot and mouth disease outbreak on the dairy farm.
Yeah, which could happen.
Which could happen.
Right.
It's one of our biggest fears in this country. We don't have foot and mouth disease in the United States. We haven't since the 1920s. But one slip, someone who has visited a farm in Europe that has foot and mouth disease and shows up on a farm in Maine, and boom, it spreads so fast.
Yeah.
We were able to simulate what would happen with a large number of animals, and I was able to calculate how much material was needed in order to compost that number of animals and how to lay it out.
Right.
And you know, we happened to use one of the photos from that research on the cover of that manual.
So you've done quite a bit of work. So I was looking through the manual myself, and it looked like even for a person like me, somebody that you know, is governed by emotion to a degree within this topic of, you know, if you have a horse that you care about or any animal that you care about and the animal dies, what to do. And I think I could actually be able to do it because the instructions were so explicit and very detailed. And part of what you're going to do with us, especially the next time, is help people understand how to plan and how to have everything prepared just in case, because if you have a horse, most of us know that that could happen at any moment. You never know when your horse is going to die. It's something that you really need to plan for and be prepared and have a good plan and a backup plan too. So all of that research has led you to the show. Is that That's about right.
In a way, yes.
It's just funny the directions and the paths that things take, but I'm really happy to have you here because this is a very interesting topic. What I want to talk about today is I want to just go over the different options that people have. And if you have horses, do you have pets by any chance?
I have
Always ask my
I
guests.
have two cats.
You have cats.
Both are rescues.
Yes? Oh, there's plenty of those,
Yeah,
right?
and
Yeah.
now one that I like to tell people about is a 23-pound male.
She's not fat, or he's
No,
not. He's a big
well,
boy.
he is kind of fat, but he's a big cat, big
Yeah.
frame. He arrived 2 days before Hurricane Sandy, and he was thin as a rail, and he just
That was
showed
just
up.
3 years ago.
Yeah,
Yep.
he just showed up in our yard,
Yeah.
and the poor thing had obviously been through a tough time.
Yeah.
He's missing an eye.
Oh, geez.
His ear on that same side was battered,
Oh, boy.
and had several other scars and obviously injuries from something. Sweetest personality,
Yeah.
and
Wasn't he lucky?
well,
And aren't you kind to have picked him up?
well, he attached himself to my significant other. She couldn't turn him away, so we finally adopted him. We had to rush to get him his shots
Yeah.
and flea treatment and all that, so he could come inside
Yep.
before the hurricane arrived.
Jeez.
We didn't want him left out in the hurricane.
No.
But he's been a real sweetheart.
Oh.
And
And then you have another cat?
and
so
we
they're
have another
companions?
cat. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And so they're not close companions because the other cat is 17.
Oh.
She was the ruler of the roost for all those years, and all of a sudden this younger male shows up.
Yeah.
But she wasn't too happy about it first, but now she's come to accept him.
Oh, well, that's good.
And
That's
so-
good. I always like to ask people about their pets, and it's something that happens to everyone when I ask is they smile. So they bring a lot of happiness to our lives, whether they're cats or dogs or horses. They're just very, very special. So now let's get on to the subject of the choices. So the choices that I found as a horse owner is you have 3, and one of them is the most traditional one. Would you call it the most traditional? Burial.
Right.
And then there's another one that has quite a bit of popularity, and you and I were talking before, since I've had dogs in the 70s, and my first dog died, the only option, because we never buried animals. I think I maybe buried a little turtle or a bird here and there over my life, but cremation. And the veterinarians, all the veterinarians where I've gone, that I guess maybe we probably figured that that's what probably we would do anyway, but that was the option. Nobody ever talked really about composting. You never really had that discussion. And maybe now veterinarians will maybe have that discussion with people, even with their smaller animals, because that seems to be another alternative that people may not even know anything about.
Right.
So burial, cremation, and composting. So let's talk about burial and talk about the advantages and disadvantages, the equipments, the costs, and the time frame. And the labor that it costs in order to do something like that. So you have this big animal, this big horse, and if I can just say that if your horse dies or you need to euthanize your horse, I was very fortunate that the vet that came to euthanize my horse euthanized my horse in the horse trailer, because if he hadn't done that, I would have been mortified and grief-stricken anyway, and not knowing what to do, because I don't have big pieces of equipment. I don't have tractors or any of that. I have a small area, or 4 acres, where I have my 2 horses, and I'm actually a city girl. I'm not a farm girl, so all of this has been new to me, and I've delved into it and dedicated my life to it and learned a tremendous amount, and now I teach people about it. But when you have a horse, you have to make really quick decisions. And part of the problem is that when we all die, things start to decompose, right?
That's
Okay,
correct.
it's just a natural scientific process. And so you can't just leave your horse there. You have to do something, right?
That's correct.
Okay, so if, say, you decided that you were going to bury your horse, what does that entail?
Well, burial, the first thing is you need to have a suitable site.
Okay,
And we recommend a site that's relatively high compared to the ground around it,
okay.
which gives you a better chance of it not having a high water table.
Okay, and can you just explain what a water table is?
The water table, there's your seasonal high water table is times of the year the water in the soil comes up to a
Okay.
certain level in the soil.
Okay, and when does that happen?
And it'll be normally in the spring.
Okay.
You know, when you have all the melt.
Okay.
And you know the water is saturating into the soil, and it'll fill those soil pore spaces up with water.
Okay,
Over the summer, that will recede, and then you'll get down to your kind of your base water table.
okay. So you need to be cognizant about that, too.
Right. So you would shouldn't bury the animal in the water table,
Okay.
because then all the decomposition products are quickly picked up and moved with the water as it moves, you know, through the soil underground.
And that's really scary. And the thing is okay, so I don't know a lot about this, but I know sand, there are a lot of materials in the soil that filtrate, that are natural filters for the water. Is that right?
Well, it is true. The sand is not a good option. Sand and gravel,
Okay.
we recommend not burying in sand and gravel
Okay,
because they're too porous.
Okay.
The water moves through it so quickly that any microbes in the soil don't have time to break down some of those decomposition products before they get away from you.
okay. So I would be an example of someone that really shouldn't even think about that, because I live close to a river, and we have really wonderful property because it drains, and we don't have mud
Well-drained.
season, but there's sand.
Right.
And so that probably wouldn't be an option for somebody
Would
like
not
me.
be a good choice.
Okay, and part of that too, that we really need to stress is that we all have wells, most of us, or a lot of us in Maine, right?
That's correct.
We don't want to contaminate our well water or anybody else's. We need to be considerate for health purposes of that, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so that's a very important consideration.
Yeah, so your site, in fact, the rules, Chapter 211,
Which you also wrote.
which you know, states that you need to have separation distances from wells and from other sensitive water bodies and so on when you choose a burial site. So that's one of the first issues, is to find a site that is as good as you can find on your property,
Okay,
that meets, you know, hopefully those setbacks. And sometimes you can't find a site that's perfect, in which case you might need to have somebody who's an expert come out and actually say, okay, we can modify the burial site in some way,
Yeah.
so to reduce the impact that you
Okay.
have. So that is a consideration right away. If you don't have any good sites on your property, then burial is really not a good option for you.
right.
So once you know you have a site that's suitable, you need to have a piece of equipment that you can dig a hole, preferably 6 feet deep, because you want to have at least 3 feet of cover over the
Okay, and
over the
that's
animal.
really important too, right? Because if you don't do that, what happens?
Animals will find it. The coyotes in particular, or dogs, if you don't have enough cover material, they can detect the odor even though you can't, and they will do what they do.
Right.
They'll,
They dig it up, and that's
dig
not
it up.
good for the animal that you're grieving about, number one. But number two, you could also be
The health impacts could be.
health impact, and that's very important.
Right.
Right.
So, so sufficient cover.
Mm-hmm.
They also recommend putting lime on the carcass.
I've read that, but I don't know why.
Well,
What is the
the
reason?
lime slows down the decomposition process, but
Mm-hmm.
it also masks the odor.
Okay.
It helps absorb some of the odor during the decomposition process.
Mm-hmm.
So it helps reduce the chance that something, will be able to smell the carcass.
Right. Or the dead body.
Yeah,
Right.
however you want to state it.
So again, like somebody like me, I have four acres, but maybe 2 of those acres are actual land. The other acres have structures on them. So I have sandy soil, so that's not a good thing. I don't think I have any like slope. It's all flat. So that's another not a good thing. And I also have neighbors around me. I'm in a neighborhood area. I'm not out in rural area. So I have to think about my neighbors, and I don't want them, to feel uncomfortable, because I think when you're in a neighborhood, you need to consider all of that. And I certainly don't want anything, any kind of odor, and I don't want any animals. And also the other thing that was really important that you mentioned to me once was that if animals come, coyotes, I mean, they're just hungry, they're little critters they need to eat anyway, but you don't want to invite wild animals into your backyard or into the neighborhoods, because then we have another problem.
That's correct.
Right?
Yeah.
That we're not only giving ourselves, but all our neighbors and anybody that's in close proximity.
Right.
Right. So now you're talking about, so we have to dig a hole. In March, that's going to be difficult.
Well, and that's a big drawback, through the winter months.
Yeah. Like you'd say like mid-November, maybe?
It depends on
The
how
hard
quickly the
frost?
ground freezes.
Yep.
It could be as early as mid-November.
Yep.
And of course, this time of year, it's really difficult
Yep.
because you've got the maximum amount of frost in the ground.
Right, right.
So you have that issue.
And then we have to buy lime or get lime somewhere. Then you need some kind of a tractor. And I know, when people lose their horses, you want to be able to get the entire body as intact as possible. And that's one of the most difficult processes in order to put the body into the ground. So
it's a big hole.
front loader, all these different
Backhoe
pieces of
or
backhoe.
excavator, generally what
Yeah.
would be used.
So if you have horses, it would be good to acquaint yourself with people that have these large pieces of equipment,
Right.
Like Andy's Agway is where I get my grain and my hay, and I think probably people along those lines might be able to help you, but it's important to be prepared and not wait until the last minute to be
Right.
making those phone calls.
To
right?
line up somebody.
Right.
If you have a neighbor who has a backhoe, that's great. You're lucky, but
Yeah.
not everybody does.
Right.
So you may end up having to hire the backhoe.
Right. And that could cost, a couple, $300 maybe. I don't know.
Well,
It's going to cost.
yeah, you could probably plan on probably $500 by the time you're
Okay.
done, because I had an excavator at my house working on a garage site. It cost me $100 to just transport it from their work site to my house. Before they even rolled it off the flatbed,
Yeah.
I had already spent $100.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if that piece of equipment is tied up for the day, it's not being used on the construction job.
Right.
So they're losing money, so they're going to charge you to make up for that.
And that's a really good point, because I think a lot of people, including myself, wouldn't think of something like that. So when you have horses, you're talking about big expenses all the way around. And it's not that easy to, what some people would consider easy, just burying their horse like it is burying your dog. It's a completely different situation.
It's a different scale.
Yeah. How long did you, I'm sorry, what were you going to say?
Well, and the other point about burial is it may not be important to you, but to farms, for instance, who have a lot of cows, if they bury their cows, they end up taking a lot of land out of production.
Oh, yeah.
Because that site is tied up for a long time, that you can't do, you can't build on it, you can't till it, you
Farm
can't
it,
farm
right.
it. So
Yeah.
to the farmer, that's a loss.
Wow. Yeah.
Now, to the horse owner who may only have one animal die occasionally, that may not be a big consideration, but
Right.
it's something you need to think of. If you've only got one spot that's suitable, it's also the best place on your property for your gazebo that you want to build.
That's right.
Then,
You gotta plan ahead.
then you know, then that's property that's tied up and you're not going to be able to use.
Right, right. And how long, we were talking earlier with people, when you bury people, people are, at least in this country, they're generally put into caskets. As far as I know, that's the only way that it's done. And the casket probably stays there for, I don't even know how many
Years and years.
and years and years the casket takes up that space. But it takes a long time, you know, if you are embalmed as a person, then the decomposition, it takes a really, really long time, right? But you're inside of a wooden box or a metal box or whatever that would be. If you put an animal in the ground and you put the body in the ground, how long does it take for that process to occur so that you can use, so the ground is what, safe again?
Well, it takes a lot longer than you think.
Yeah.
I mentioned to you a couple of examples, situations. One was with the alpaca that was buried on a farm.
Right.
More than a year later, a college student or a college professor at the University of Maine wanted to show his students the skeleton, and they excavated and discovered that it wasn't a skeleton at all. It was still
It was intact.
an intact
That's amazing.
alpaca, so
Yeah.
they ended up just covering it up and said, well, never mind.
Yeah. But they must have been really surprised.
Right, because they thought that it would be gone after a
Bones,
year.
right?
Right, they
Yeah.
thought they would have some clean bones to inspect,
And
but they
a
didn't.
skeleton to study from.
Right.
And instead you got the animal still
Right.
there. So that's a little scary.
Yeah. So it does take a long
time.
Because it's in a cold environment, and it has very limited oxygen, so the decomposition process is slowed way down.
Yeah, okay. And that's something I think also, you know, we don't always think about. Then we have town ordinances, so that you probably need to check and see, just to be responsible in terms of what you're doing, to see if there are any ordinances, right?
That's correct.
And then as far as the environment, you know, the land, I wonder sometimes if people are going to run out of land to put more caskets in the land, because to me it just almost sounds disproportionate, because there must be so much land already that's being used just for that. Right?
Right.
And in, like you said, the large farms where there are a lot of deaths of animals, it's something that we don't think about. We go by a farm, we see the beautiful animals, we enjoy it, it's pristine, it smells good, it's green, but animals die just like people, and you have to do something with the bodies.
That's correct.
So I know the Department of Agriculture, has a, it's not a, is it a rule that you should only, or is it, it's not a law, but it's what is this, a suggestion that you only bury one horse per year?
It's not a rule, but there's, I guess, a recommendation. If you're going to be doing
yeah.
more than that,
Yeah.
then you really should look at another option.
Yeah, because there could be health hazards.
Right, and you're soon going to run out of space.
Right,
too.
right.
I wanted to kind of interject here.
Yep.
We talk about large farms, dairy farms, who have multiple animals
Yeah.
die each year. I was just recently at the largest dairy farm in the state. I've been doing some work with them. And in a conversation with the farmer, he mentioned, oh, this material that I'm working with, works great for composting the cows as they die. And so I said, oh, you know, that makes me feel good to know that, you know, the research work that I've been doing in the past is now being picked up by the farms,
Yes.
and they're actually using it.
Yes.
And he said, yeah, I don't think there's any cows in Maine being buried anymore. He said, this is so much easier than burial that virtually all the dairy farms have just gone to
Really?
to composting their
Wow.
animals because it's so much easier.
Wow, and it's just beneficial all the way around.
Yeah.
It's not bad for the environment, it's good for the soil,
And
and
they,
those are all
that
positive
field
things. That's wonderful.
is, they can rotate it on the field.
Yeah.
The field's not tied up.
Yeah.
Any nutrients from the compost piles that get left behind, they till it in, they plant a crop, and,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
away you go. So.
Yeah, well, another subject for me to talk to my hay person about, who's also, he has dairy cows. So, but that's very interesting, and that must make you feel really good because all your research has helped people, you know, things are
Right. Well,
changing because of that.
it's changed. You know, it really does make me feel good because it's kind of changed the dynamic of how those carcasses are managed on dairy farms.
Yes,
now.
yes.
And you know, now they recognize this is a much better way than what they were doing before.
Right, right, and boarding facilities with horses. You know, some boarding facilities have. You know, there's one here close to Biddeford that has probably 40+ horses, and the horses stay. They come and go, but at all the facilities where I have been, there have been horses that have died, and they were all buried. And I never thought about the implications of that before. They weren't my horses, and it was a very, very sad situation, but they're all buried. And maybe this will open people's eyes up because we're going to talk about composting. We're going to dedicate the whole show, next show, to that, but we're just doing an introduction to it now. So to get people ready for this new dynamics of what is changing in the way we treat our animals that we love in life and die. So then we have cremation. So back to burial though, so it's going to cost you a little bit probably, unless you have all that equipment, all that time, somebody to drive the equipment, and you know, to have to do it yourself. So there's some labor in there, and there's going to be some costs, even if they're not a lot, even if you have somebody that you know. It's a process, right? So then we have cremation, and cremation is something that I'm very familiar with. I think I told you I have a mantle, and it's full. And my husband and I really need to do something. You know, we were going to go and sprinkle the ashes, which, you know, I understand have no nutrients at all. It's ash, right? And ash and what else? Ash and there was something else in the... Oh, bone fragments, right? But basically, the animals are incinerated. They do that for people now. I think I read that 55% of Americans are still buried, and I guess it would be like about 45%. That's what the research says are opting for cremation. So they have large animal crematoriums, and I've always had my dogs cremated. They just go from the vet's office to the crematorium, and then I get a little box of ashes like this, and if there are people out there that have never had this process done, they're in a pretty little box, so I have quite a few boxes of all different sizes for my dogs. My dog here was probably about close to 100 pounds.
Wow.
So that's my dog. But here I have my horse, and like many people, probably I had no idea what to expect. I had never had the experience before. I didn't know about composting. It was a very sudden thing for me, and I had two options basically. It was bury my horse. It was midnight. It was a terrible, terrible few hours that I had to go through with him. Until he was euthanized. I had the fortune or misfortune of having to go to the hospital, the horse hospital in Dover, quite a bit over the years for one thing or another, and they have a crematorium there. So I had seen it. And the vet that I had, like I said before, he was very skilled, and he was very patient with me, very kind. And he put my horse to sleep in the trailer, because if he hadn't done that, that would have been a whole nother issue. Because then we're talking about the time once the horse dies, once the body is no longer living and it begins to decompose. So this is my horse, and this box weighs about 50 pounds. And had you ever seen a horse in a box?
I never had.
Well, I think a lot of people have never had that experience, and he's been sitting in the same place since 2008. So this was his first outing, because we have to be a little bit comedic about this and lighten it up a little, because it's difficult. But he was a wonderful horse, and so I had him cremated. It cost me, just so people know, that's a very important piece. He weighed almost 1,100 pounds. And that's actually the first time I got an accurate weight, because we measure horses with these tapes, and they give you some kind of an idea, but they're not that accurate. Right. So he weighed quite a bit more than we thought. And it cost $1,300. And that was a few years ago. I called, it has been bought by somebody else now, The Final Gift. That was the name of the crematorium. But as far as that process went, it was easier for me, because the worst part about it was that I had to drive my dead horse in the trailer to Dover. But getting beyond that, as we've talked about, having to get beyond all these things in order to be able to talk about them and provide information. Once I drove him there, they took over, and they were extremely compassionate and very kind and very careful. And I knew that he was going to be in there all by himself. I didn't stay for the process. I know that now, even with human, when people get cremated, that you're invited to be a part of that. And I can understand that piece of it, but I didn't. And I just went back and I picked up his ashes. And there are the ashes. But let's talk a little bit about that. The equipment that you needed, if my vet hadn't put him to sleep in the trailer, then we'd have been talking more money probably to hire people to get equipment to try and get my horse transported. Right. Or have them pick my horse up and take him.
So it would have been an added expense.
That would be an added expense. And then how about the emissions from the crematoriums? We talked about that a little bit, and I said the Environmental Protection Agency, but Maine has its own agency.
Right. It's the Maine DEP.
Maine DEP.
Regulates all incinerators, including crematoriums.
Okay, okay.
And there are standards for emissions that are actually referenced in the rules.
Okay. And that's this book here?
That's that book.
And this rule? Okay,
Yes.
so in this manual, you talk about all of this, right?
Right. It's got all of the different acceptable disposal methods in there.
Okay, okay.
And in fact, it even talks about, one or two that are not acceptable.
Oh, good.
Some that used to be accepted and are no longer.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people may not know about that. Right. So it's important.
So in the past, for example, farmers would often just drag the cow out and dump it over the stone wall, and since they couldn't see it, it was okay.
It was okay, yeah, out of sight, out of mind, yeah.
And then they wondered why they had coyotes bothering their cows who were about to calve.
Right, oh geez, yeah.
So.
Like 1 + 1 = 2. Right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so no, because I know actually someone that very compassionately had, when her animals died, she would take them, she had quite a few acres, hundreds of acres, and she would take them where she thought it was far enough away, but then she had live animals too. On her farm, and I don't know that she really thought about the possibility of the coyotes coming up onto the property and attacking them, right? And so that's something that you really have to think about, plus the disease process like we were talking about and where all that is going to go, right? Yeah. So as far as cremation goes, that seems to be something that people, or at least I think they tend to do that on a fairly regular basis. Now we're talking about the possibility of another option that people could have that might help them also with the grieving process to be able to take care of their horse or a large animal in another manner. As far as cremation goes, there was one other thing I wanted to mention. I don't know if you have this on in your manual as one of the do not do's, but when I was on the internet, I looked something up, and in there was somebody that actually tried to cremate her horse at home.
Ouch.
Well, yeah, and according to what I read, it had been successful, but we wouldn't suggest or recommend that anybody try to do something like that. In part, the heat that is required, right?
Right.
To do that, you might not be able to do on your own.
Right. And that is a process that they used to call burning an animal. It's like a pyre, P-Y-R-E, which is usually a fairly elaborate setup where you put the animal on top of like railroad ties with tires underneath and coal and other flammable materials that are going to burn a long time and give a lot of heat.
Yeah.
But that's not allowed anymore because these open pyres generate an incredible amount of smoke and particulate matter and all kinds of nasty things go off into the air.
Right. That would be terrible.
They tried doing pyres to get rid of some of the cows in Great Britain when they had that foot and mouth outbreak, and the plume downwind from those pyres was so toxic and spread for such long distances that they had incredible complaints from people miles and miles downwind.
Yeah,
and
I bet.
And they had to stop doing it.
Yeah.
And they also discovered that it actually spread the disease.
Yep, I can see
because as you heated the carcass, these gases are given off and carrying this virus downwind.
Yeah.
And so they had to do away with that.
Yeah, so unhealthy and unsafe.
It's both.
Yeah. And if you're trying to let go of your horse with dignity, that's probably not a good way of doing it.
It's not going to be a very dignified ending for the poor horse.
No, it's going to cause you a lot of work too.
Right.
And if say you bury your horse and you don't, and somebody does complain, somebody's well gets contaminated, the soil something happens. The Department of Agriculture, there is no fining, but it could cost you a whole lot more in order to do it correctly.
Right.
Right?
Right. Anytime you have to go back and undo what you did before. And
would not be pretty either.
No, it's not pleasant. So.
Yeah. So, as far as burial goes, cremation, 24 hours, and feeling very, very comfortable with the fact that that's my horse. And as far as burial goes, we're saying that, in a whole year's time that there wasn't a lot of decomposition of the animal, of the llama. So we don't really know, I guess, how long it actually might take. But with what we're going to talk about next time, composting, it takes within a few months, depending on what time of the year, I suppose.
Right, and the size of the animal, and the medium that you're working with.
Yeah.
So, it could be as quick as 10 to 12 weeks, and it might be 5 months.
Yeah, if you do it right.
If you do it right.
You have to do it right.
Right.
And in here, you have it spelled out, right? So anybody, including me, can actually read this and understand. And I think it would be really good if people would, it's good to have these in advance, to be able to just look at it, have it in your library, and have it for as a resource.
Right. And copies of that are available from the Department of Agriculture. So,
yeah, and so all they have to do is call the Department of Agriculture. Do you have their number by any chance?
I don't have it.
287, I don't have it.
Yeah, it's a 287.
We'll bring that with us the next time so that people have it, but then they can get, the department sends these to you at no cost.
Right.
So they're very nice to have. the other thing that I wanted to just mention is people sometimes take their, or I don't know if that happens anymore, the landfills. You said that really, and that's not a good way of doing it,
most
is it?
landfills don't accept animal carcasses any
Yeah.
longer. In an emergency situation, where say you had a large number of animals killed in a flood,
Right.
this governor may declare an emergency, and that would allow them to use a landfill as a last resort.
Right. Right.
But
Because that's not really healthy either.
no, there's always leachate that comes from landfills, no matter
Yeah.
how securely they make them.
Yeah.
And there's the methane gas,
Right.
which escapes from landfills, which is extremely bad for the atmosphere.
Yes.
So, and the landfill operators don't like having their space, which is precious to them, taken up with these large animals.
Right.
that,
Right.
Right. Are going to be contributing negatives to
Right.
their whole operation.
Right.
So,
I have a couple of dogs that I got. They came up from the south, the way a lot of these little dogs come, and the particular rescue group that got these dogs told me that one of them came from a kill shelter there in Indiana, and it was just what they did is they dispose of all the bodies in the landfill. And when she said that to me, I was shocked to hear that that would be okay, because I can't even imagine the impact that that is going to have on the environment and on the land, on the water, on everything. And it's just a sad way of disposing of animals, I think.
Feels
Not very
disrespectful.
dignified. I think so, yeah. So when we talk next time, do we cover everything about all the three? We're gonna talk about composting next time. Is there anything else you want to say about burial or cremation?
Not that I can think of. I think we touched on the high points there.
Advantages and disadvantages, and trying to figure it out and plan ahead. Right. So next time when we talk, I want to talk about the main composting school and what you do there, and get information on where people can, if they attend or take a class there. That's possible to do, and that would be very important information, because this is not a trend. It's something that it's changing in society, and it's actually a very good change. One of the good changes that we see happening, so I think we're going to end the show with that for now. And I want to thank you very much for coming, and I can't wait to have you back again so we can devote the entire show. The next show is going to be about composting, and how we can treat our animals with compassion and care and give back to the environment, right?
Right. I'm looking forward to the next segment.
And stay tuned for our next show. Our next show is going to be called Getting Fit to Ride. Instead of the other way around, getting our horses fit, which we need to do anyway, we're going to talk about how we can get in better shape so that we don't hurt our horses when we ride. So I look forward to you joining us for that show in a couple of weeks. And this is Gabriela Rodriguez saying thank you very much for joining us today. And don't forget to enjoy your horse, care for your horse, and keep your horse. See you next time.